we really felt like Family Life had a good army, ground troops on the ground in nearly 100 communities around the United States where we were holding our conferences and had hundreds of small groups, thousands of small groups meeting to study what the scriptures had to say about marriage and family. But we really felt like we needed an Air Force. We needed something from a mass media standpoint that would raise the awareness of what we were doing and proclaim Christ and the biblical blueprints for marriage and family so that more couples and more families could benefit and more legacies could be left for future generations to take the gospel to their generation. And so we began to pray about the possibility of a radio program and ask God to show us the way. Well, at about the same time, a couple flew into Little Rock to become donors to what Family Life was doing. And basically, it was prompted by a wife. She found out about Family Life because she and her husband had been to the Weekend to Remember Marriage conference. And this particular gentleman is, at the time, was the owner of McCoy's Lumber Company, Mike McCoy. So Mike and Myra had flown in, and they said, "What do you have?" We said, "Well, we want to start a parenting conference." We said, "That's about $225,000. And they said, "Well, what else do you have? What else are you going to do?" I said, "Well, we want to start a radio show, we think. A lot of things got to fall in place. How much is that?" "Well, that's about $775,000. And they flew off and flew out. And this is one of the great stories of the history of Family Life, because a couple of days later, after they'd left, they called back and said, "We'd like to do the parenting. We'd like to do the parenting conference," and committed the money to do that, sizable sum of money. And Mike said, "The only thing I ask is that you keep it confidential." Well, I made a mistake, not on purpose, but I accidentally slipped because our staff knew they had been in the office a week before, and a week later I shared that the money had been given for our parenting conference. Of course, our staff put two and two together, and so I had to call Mike and Myra and offer to send the money back. And I got Mike on the phone and said, "You asked that this be confidential. I didn't breach it on purpose. Our staff put two and two together, figured out you gave the money. If I need to send the money back, I will." And there was a pause for like what seemed like a minute, only probably 5 seconds. And then Mike began to laugh. And he said, "You know, it was probably unfair of me to give you a gift like that and then ask you to keep it a secret." He said, "Besides, you can go do that radio show you want to go do too." And he committed over $750,000 to that. Well, I began to weep. I wept because as a friend of mine, Joe Stowell, former president of Moody Bible Institute, says, when God does something like that, that's the signature of God. He's showed up and he's provided, and as I like to say, he showed up and showed off. Well, God provided the money, he provided the agency, then he provided Bob Lapine, who is the finest talent and best mind, I believe, in all of Christian radio. He came and launched our radio show in November of 1992. Broadcast mushroomed from there all the way to 9.2 million people who listened to a spiritual transmission center where the truth of this book and the truth about him and the experience of him can be passed on to declare him to other generations as well.